You're listening to ArchaeoEd, a podcast about the ancient civilizations of the Americas. I'm your host, Ed Barnhart. I've been an archaeologist, an explorer, and a seeker of esoteric knowledge all over the Americas for 30 years and counting. This podcast is just me, no guests to help me fill the airtime. Sometimes I'll teach you about the many civilizations of the Americas long before Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Other times, I'll tell stories of my adventures in the field. It's just me, freed from the podium and talking like we're just having a beer together. If that sounds good to you, then sit back, relax, and let me tell you a tale. Season 6, Episode 6, Inca Origins. Hello, and welcome back for another episode of ArchaeoEd. This time we'll talk about the origins of Inca civilization. As usual, we'll need to use both contact period chronicles and archaeology to reconstruct the picture. But first, let's make sure we're all on the same page by setting the Inca in time and space. The Inca were a civilization centered in the Andes Mountains of what's now Peru in South America. They were the last great civilization before Spanish conquest. Their time on Earth was relatively short, lasting at most 200 years, from the mid-1300s to 1533 when Pizarro conquered their empire. Well, Pizarro and 13 infectious diseases that wiped out 90% of the people in the first 50 years of contact. Archaeologically, we can clearly see that the Inca were the last of a parade of Andean civilizations that started more than 5,000 years ago. But the Inca themselves told very different stories of their origins, ones that portrayed them as divinely ordained to rule the Andean world. The trouble is that there are a lot of origin stories recorded in the chronicles, and they don't all agree. In places, they even seem to contradict each other. Multiple chronicles tell a similar tale of Inca origins, involving the migrations of 4 brothers and 4 sisters who travel from Lake Titicaca to Cuzco. But only 2 that I know of say anything about time before the Inca. Both were written by Quechua-speaking native people. Those 2 books are The First New Chronicle and Good Government by Felipe Huaman Poma de Ayala and the Huarochiri manuscript. First, Huaman Poma's accounts. Huaman Poma, which means falcon puma in Quechua, was born in 1535 to a non-Inca royal family in northern Peru. He was a smart, well-educated man in both Andean and European traditions. He served as a translator for multiple Spanish priests and judges, but then in 1600 he was stripped of all of his lands and possessions and exiled from his homeland by those same Spanish courts. For the rest of his life, he traveled and wrote his chronicle, completing it in 1615, when he said he was 80 years old. It was over 1,000 pages and included 400 elaborate illustrations, an invaluable resource for scholars like me. He addressed it to King Philip III of Spain, and it was mostly complaints about Spanish mismanagement and cruelty to the indigenous peoples. But he also included sections on Andean history, going back thousands of years before the Inca Empire. He said that there were 5 ages of the world, each lasting 1,000 years. Age 1 was the time of Wari Wiracocha Runa, the Lama Viracocha people. They wore clothes of leaves and used stone tools. Huaman Poma says they originally worshipped Europe's god, but then turned to Andean gods. Age 2 was the Wari Runa, the Lama people. They wore animal skins and farmed. They were peaceful, not warlike, and worshipped Viracocha as their creator deity. A flood wiped them out. Age 3 was populated by Puran Runa, wild people. These people had textiles, jewelry, and knew how to mine precious metals. It was a population explosion, and big towns ruled by kings were everywhere. But warfare broke out between the towns, and they destroyed their world. Age 4 was the Auca Runa, the warlike people. This was when the Andean world was divided into 4 quarters, and the base 10 or decimal counting system began. Warfare was rampant, and people had to live in hilltop forts to survive. There were many technology advances, but life was chaotic and scary. Finally, the 5th age was that of the Inca. The order of society was set. An empire of peace and prosperity was established. Wamanpoma says that they worshipped the demons of Cuzco, and that the 5th age ended with the Spanish conquest. Now, I would love to embrace this account, but there are problems in doing so. First, this was written by an exiled, no doubt disgruntled man in his 70s. Was this just his theory of better times, or did he learn that as a young man from Andean teachers? Second, it was written to King Philip III and likely meant to establish indigenous ancestral ownership of the land. Third, and most importantly, his is the only known account of these 5 ages. We have dozens, perhaps hundreds of chronicles, and only Wamanpoma mentions these 5 ages. If you've been listening to my podcast, you know how much I distrust enigmas. But then again, most of the information in Waman's chronicle is verifiably correct. So why would this part be so wrong or made up? So the other colonial period document that discusses pre-Inca creation is the Huarochiri manuscript. It was written by an anonymous author in Quechua sometime in the late 1500s and then translated by Spanish priests. Then it was ignored for centuries until a German ethnologist found it in the Royal Library of Madrid in the 1930s. Now it's been translated into many languages, and it's the subject of intense debate. Not knowing the author is a deficit. Knowing that it was transcribed and potentially changed by Spanish priests is another. It's been called the Andean Bible because its contents is all about myths, religions, and traditions of the Huarochiri province at contact period. But its contents is replicated nowhere else, which makes it one of those enigmas that I'm cautious of. Nevertheless, it's worth considering. Like Wamanpoma's account, it speaks of past ages, but not cleanly as ages per se. Instead, it talks about a sequence of wakas that ancient people worshipped. By wakas, it seems to mean gods, or at least supernatural beings, but the exact definition of waka in this context is unclear. The common meaning of the term waka is a place or shrine where ancestral mummies are kept, or more generally, a sacred place. Either way, it's a place, not a being, so that's confusing. The Huarochiri manuscript has 31 chapters and 2 supplemental sections. That's a lot of info. But its narrative is not linear. It jumps back and forth in time, which is also kind of confusing. If we unravel it and put it in a chronological sequence, it says roughly this. There were 3 main ages of the pre-Inca past. The first was ruled by 2 beings called Yananyamka and Tulanyamka. They weren't really wakas, but they pretended to be. They were defeated and overthrown by a true waka named Wayayayo, who was the first to transmit life force to humans, whatever that means. In his time, humans lived in a magically fertile place, a place where from planting to harvest was just 5 days. And it was full of red and yellow parrots, and people who died would reincarnate in just 5 days. That reincarnation caused a population explosion, and humans had to migrate up into the Andes. Huayayayo decreed that each family could only have 2 children, and he would eat one of them. Multiple places in the manuscript refer to him as the people eater. But then comes a more benevolent Waka named Pariakaka. He defeats Huayayayo and banishes him and his parrots to a place called Antis. Since the Inca term for the Amazon was Antisuyu, it's a good bet that he was banished there. Most of the rest of the manuscript tells about this Waka named Pariakaka. Soon after his rise to power in the Andes, the Inca people show up with their own Wakas. Their main one is called Kuniraya Huarochiri. Most scholars agree that that's Viracocha, the well-known Inca creator deity. About midway through the manuscript, it says that Waka Pariakaka was the creation of Viracocha, and that Viracocha is the most ancient of the Wakas. Chapters 3 and 4 speak of a flood that wipes out all life below the mountaintops, and then it speaks of another cataclysm in which there was a period of 5 days where the sun died. In that darkness, the rocks came to life and ate all the humans. That kind of sounds like some of Wamanpoma's ages, but not exactly. Chapter 5 explains that Pariakaka was born in the age of the pair of fake human Wakas, and that he was born from a set of 5 eggs. Again, 5 eggs. What does that mean? Most of the rest of the chapters tell stories of how the offspring of Pariakaka helped the Inca to defeat their enemies and establish their empire. So there you have it. Everything I know about pre-Inca mythology recorded at Contact. I'll take my first commercial break here, and when I return, we'll talk about the much more common mythic story of Inca origins. People ask me for book recommendations all the time, and I've got one for you. It's written by my friend Matt Savino and called Land Without a Continent. In 2018, he drove his FJ Cruiser from Los Angeles all the way to Panama. Land Without a Continent is a very humorous account of his adventures. He meets interesting people, explores breathtaking landscapes, and gets himself in a pickle or two. Along the way, he visits a dozen Mesoamerican ruins and does a great job explaining them. I can attest to its accuracy because I'm his fact checker. I've done some boring editing jobs in my time, but Matt's book had me in stitches. His sudden pop culture references are laugh out loud funny. And his archaeology research was so good that even I learned a thing or two. The book ends with an insightful and positive message on U.S. immigration, a subject near and dear to my heart. Part humorous travel log, part adventure story, and part history lesson, Land Without a Continent has something for everyone. You can find it on Amazon or wherever you buy books online. I'll also put a direct link to it in my show notes. Land Without a Continent by Matt Savino. Give it a read. There's a much more common story of Inca origins told in multiple chronicles. The details change a bit from version to version, but they all start with a creator deity named Viracocha emerging from Lake Titicaca. He creates the first race of people on the lake shore, and they're said to have been giants. But they displease Viracocha somehow, and he destroys them with a flood and turns them into stone. The Inca people told the Spanish that the tall stone statues at Tiwanaku were proof of that ancient race. Next, Viracocha goes to the island of the sun, and he calls forth the sun, the moon, and the stars. They rise for the first time over a feature on the island called the Sacred Rock. We know where that rock is. I've stood there in front of it at sunrise on the June solstice. The people of the lake have never forgotten it, and the chronicles say that the Sapa Inca in Cuzco would travel there every June solstice to pay homage to Viracocha and celebrate the anniversary of the first day. By the way, the Aymara people who live on the south end of Lake Titicaca also see June solstice as a sort of New Year's Day. I once led a group to the Aymara June Solstice Festival at Tiahuanaco. At dawn, it was us and maybe 5,000 Aymara people freezing our butts off and watching an Aymara priest sacrifice a black llama. It was one of the most otherworldly experiences I've ever been part of. But anyway, back to Viracocha. Once the world has light, he makes a second race of humans. He molds them from clay and soft rocks on the shores of Lake Titicaca. Then he paints each one different colors and gives them different languages. He sends them out to become the different nations. He makes the Inca last, and they're special. Everyone is sent out to populate the earth via a long cave, a tunnel that stretches from Lake Titicaca to a place just south of Cuzco. Then Viracocha checks out, flying northwest into the heavens. The people all emerge from a cave just south of a place called Pakari Tambo, which means dawn house. The cave has 3 openings, and it was called Tambo Toko, or window house. All of Viracocha's humans came out of there, but only the Inca came out of the middle cave called Capac Toko. That means rich window. Machu Picchu has a central temple with 3 big windows. Many scholars, myself included, think it's a symbolic Tambo Toko. 8 Inca people emerged, 4 brothers and 4 sisters. The women were named Mama Okyo, Mama Huaco, Mama Cura, and Mama Raua. The men were named Ayar Manco, Ayar Oka, Ayar Kachi, and Ayar Uchu. Ayar means corpse or mummy, which clearly refers to the ancestral mummy traditions of Inca civilization. These were the first men and women, the very first ancestors. Viracocha imbued them with a destiny to establish their kingdom in a fertile valley. At Pakari Tambo, they ally with the Tambo people, who pledged to be their army in exchange for land and title in their new kingdom. They all head northwest, the same direction that Viracocha did. But before they do, they ditch brother Ayar Kachi. He was being cruel to the Tambo and annoying the other siblings. So they tricked him, telling him to go back to get something they forgot in the cave. He refuses, but then Mama Huaco calls him a coward and shames him into going. They send a big Tambo with him, who seals the cave behind Ayar Kachi with a huge boulder. It's amusing to note that this kind of family dysfunction is a common theme in the stories of Inca royalty. But anyhow, now we're down to 3 brothers Ayar. Ayar Manco has a golden staff to test the fertility of the soil as they seek their new homeland. From atop Huarochiri mountain, he throws it into the Valley of Cuzco, and it sinks deep into the ground. Pay dirt. It's very fertile. The youngest brother, Ayar Uchu, turns into an eagle and flies to the sun. He returns with a confirmation that Cuzco is the right place, and then turns into a stone monument at the top of the valley's edge. Now with only 6 siblings, they enter the valley. But there are people there already, and they resist the Inca. Mama Huaco is deadly with a sling. She enters the valley first and hits a man so hard that he explodes. The rest immediately surrender, and the valley is theirs. Finally, Brother Ayar Oka walks into the center of the valley and also turns into a stone monument. The last remaining brother, Ayar Manco, becomes Manco Capac, the dynastic founder of the Inca royal lineage. He and Mama Okyo have a son together, Sinchi Roca, and he becomes the second Inca king, or Sapa Inca, as they were referred to. Though clearly this story is mythical, Manco Capac and his son Sinchi Roca are listed as the Sapa Incas 1 and 2 on every lineage chart I've ever seen. The story ends with a bit of capital establishment stuff. Cusco is divided into Upper and Lower Huron, with the Tombo people establishing 10 ayus, or kin groups, to be the residential elite families of Cusco. And Mama Wako uses her leadership skills to plant corn all over the valley, establishing the Inca wealth base. So that's the mythic story of how the Inca began. I can't help myself from wondering why those two brothers turned into stone monuments. Some accounts qualify them as stone towers, and that makes me think of my archaeoastronomy studies. Early Spanish chronicles report that there were 12 stone towers on the peaks above the Valley of Cuzco. They were associated somehow with the monthly ritual cycle, so the Spanish demolished them. One of their bases have been found by archaeologists, or at least we think we found one, but none of the other 11 towers. It's been suggested that they functioned as a solar clock, marking the sun's passage through the festival year. If true, there must have been an observation point from the city below. We don't know where that is either, though it's funny that one of the modern monuments in Cusco today is a big stone tower. Were the brothers who turned into stone monuments a shout-out to the importance of a set of astronomical towers? It's just a theory, but I like it. Okay, last commercial break here. When I return, we'll see whether archaeology can confirm any of this epic tale of Inca origins. What are you doing in late April, just after Easter? Well, I suggest you go to the ruins of Angkor in Cambodia with Luke Caverns. Luke is my apprentice in archaeology, and I'm trying to teach him everything I know. As a research associate at Maya Exploration Center, he'll be leading an educational travel program and continuing our archaeoastronomy research in Cambodia this April. The timing of the trip is over Zenith Passage, the day the sun passes directly overhead at noon. In the ancient Khmer Empire, that happened twice a year, in April and August. I've been there to document the amazing beams of light that enter the temples at Zenith Passage in August, but never in April. That's where Luke's expedition team comes in. The people with him in April will help document those beams of light for the very first time. Now you might be thinking, Cambodia? Isn't that a scary place? I've been there many times, and it's far from it. The accommodations are luxury, the food is great, and the people are wonderful. The country of Cambodia is Buddhist, and its people are kind, gentle, and trustworthy. I have good friends there that will partner with Luke every step of the way and smooth the journey. You might also be thinking, it's so far away, and April is so soon. Well, you're right about the distance. It's on the other side of the planet. But as far as timing, I have a wise old travel buddy who goes by the travel name Kashmir Duvet. He talks just like that. And Kashmir says, those who travel always find a way, and those who don't always find a reason not to. My question to you is, which one are you? To learn more about our April trip to Cambodia, go to Maya Exploration Center's website. Links in my bio. We only take 13 people max, and it's almost full. If you want to come, don't delay. So now, what does archaeology say about Inca origins? Does it jive in any way with the Inca story? Or at least indicate that the Inca people indeed believed it? Let's take a look at some of the elements of the story, starting with Viracocha starting the world at Lake Titicaca. Archaeologist Brian Bauer has done some great work on this. The myth goes that Viracocha called the sun, the moon, and the stars from the island of the sun. Then historical chronicles state that the Sapa Inca would travel there every June solstice for the anniversary of the event. He would stand exactly where Viracocha stood and watch the sun rise over the sacred rock. Bauer, with the help of Aymara people living on the island, found the sacred rock and recorded the June solstice sun rising above it. I led a group of people there myself in 2008, barely making it to the sacred rock before sunrise after a 2-hour boat ride in darkness from Copacabana. We didn't see exactly what Bauer recorded, but it did rise over the rock. There was another part of the chronicles that Bauer also confirmed. It was said that an entourage of hundreds accompanied the king to the island of the sun, but that they had a different viewing point. That crowd stood some 300 meters off at a plaza with a view of the sun rising between two towers. Bauer found those two towers and confirmed their identity through the alignment with the entourage viewing point. I saw those too. Overall, I think the evidence is pretty solid. The Inca likely did take pilgrimages to the island, specifically to honor Viracocha for his act of creating the world there. How about the caves of Tambo Toco and the nearby city, Pacaritambo? Well, for generations, modern Quechua people have taken pilgrimages to a cave they identify as Tambo Toco. It's southeast of Cuzco, at a direction and distance similar to what's described in the myths. In the 1990s, a large area of ruins nearby the cave was excavated. It turned out to be over 200 finely built structures with gold and silver offerings buried under some of its temple floors. From the look of it, it was an Inca royal palace, one of the many of the Sapa Inca palatial royal residences. Was it built there to honor the original location of Pacaritambo? The upper excavations produced Inca ceramics, but the lower levels had Wari ceramics dating to 1100 to 1200 CE. Was that earlier Wari settlement what the myths call the local Tambo people? I wager that the palace was built there because the Inca believed that. Next stop for our mythological heroes was the Valley of Cuzco. The story says that they first saw it from atop Huarochiri mountain. I can definitely say that that mountain exists. Locals in Cuzco pointed it out to me years ago. It's not some super tall or unique peak, just one on the edge of the valley that's still known as Huarochiri Mountain, where Ayar Manco threw his golden staff from. Finally, the Inca descended into the Valley of Cuzco to find it was defended by a group of people already settled there. Does archaeology find evidence of settlement in the valley before the Inca? The answer is yes, in fact over 2,000 years before the Inca arrived. The first people living full-time in the valley were farmers and shepherds. Evidence goes back to about 1000 BCE. Though honestly, that evidence is scant. A few artifacts dated by stratigraphy and carbon-14 dates is all we have. We call those people the Chapanada culture. Their tools, pottery, and constructions change over time, but we don't see a significantly different cultural pattern until about 600 CE. From 600 to 900 CE, We call the people of the Valley of Cuzco the Cotacali culture. The trigger is the Wari civilization rising to the west of Cuzco. Starting around 500 CE, with a homeland in the Ayacucho Valley, they become the first truly expansionist empire of the Andes. They start imprinting their way of life onto other cultures that they absorb, even going as far as constructing new cities that look very much like their capital city back in the Ayacucho Valley. One of those outpost cities was built just 20 kilometers east of Cuzco. It's called Piquilacta, and it functioned from about 600 to 1100 CE. In the Valley of Cuzco, the Cotacali people started picking up Wari practices. Both their architecture and ceramic types changed. One of the biggest changes was a shift to agriculture terracing. Up until then, they farmed the hillsides, but not on terraces. That was a Wari technology that the Inca would later ramp up. But then around 1000 CE, the Wari start falling apart. Their capital city is all but abandoned by 1100. The areas they conquered still had their imprint, but much like Europe after the fall of Rome, the provinces started diversifying into new cultural identities. In Cuzco, the Quilque culture arises. The Quilque were first recognized and named by archaeologist John Rowe in the 1950s. At that time, it was little more than a ceramic sequence Rowe had identified. But since then, a number of Quilque sites have been found underneath Cuzco. I've got this hotel I like to stay at in Cuzco called Hotel Ruinas. I love those guys, and I felt bad for them when a giant JW Marriott was built right next to them. But during the construction, they dug a basement and ran into Quilque architecture. The city of Cuzco forced them to make it a permanent archaeological exhibit. So pro tip from me, if you're ever in Cuzco, check out the basement of the JW Marriott. It's a public exhibit. They have to let you in. Anyhow, just a few years back, a much more important Quilque discovery was made. Excavations at Sacsayhuaman, the fortress above the city, revealed that it was built not by the Inca, but by the Quilque people. The Inca definitely expanded upon it, but carbon-14 dates of its interior levels came back at about 1100 CE. The Inca didn't even show up until perhaps the mid-1300s, so that massive construction must have been Quilque. Sacsayhuaman has these massive, irregular-shaped stones in its walls, the largest weighing over 100 tons. Down in the city below, there's only one ancient structure with the same kind of huge, irregular blocks. That's known as the Palace of Sinchi Roca, the second Sapa Inca of Cuzco and the son of Manco Cápac. When the Spanish asked the Inca how they built it, they said that it was there already when they arrived. Now, you can conclude from that it was aliens, or you could connect it to the new, surprising evidence at Sacsayhuaman that the Quilque people were capable of building that kind of architecture. But now let's bring this back to the Inca origin story. The story says that there was a resistant, powerful community in the valley that the Inca had to overcome. When the Quilque were little more than a ceramic collection, that didn't jive. But now that we can attribute Sacsayhuaman and perhaps the Palace of Sinchi Roca to them, it does. So in conclusion, while I'm not suggesting that people transformed into stone monuments or that Mama Wako blew someone up with a rock from a sling, what I am saying is that ethnology and archaeology do find many of the locations that the Inca creation story discusses. Until next time, this is Ed signing off. You've been listening to ArchaeoEd, a podcast about the ancient civilizations of the Americas. If you like what you heard, please click like, subscribe, and tell your friends. If you didn't, don't do any of that stuff. ArchaeoEd is written, recorded, and produced by me, Ed Barnhart, and it's owned by my company, Ancient Explorations, LLC. ArchaeoEd is my intellectual property, all rights reserved. Copyright 2025.